All right, the news gang is here. The BBI report is here. Is it a hit or a miss? Also, the bombers of tension, who spoiled the party? And the great teacher from Tanzania, is Kenya the poor student who gets D's all the way? We have a university professor's assessment on the news gang tonight. We'll also have the memo, the punchline, the kicker, and the angle. Yvonne Okwara-Matole is away tonight, and that means we won't have heartache. But her seat will not be empty tonight. Joining us on the panel tonight is Professor Patricia Kameri-Mbote, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Nairobi. And she was at the Bombers of Kenya yesterday, actually. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and a special welcome to Prof.
Thank you.
Yes, we saw you there at the Bombers of Kenya. Maybe it's just right to start with you. What's your overall impression of that report that was launched yesterday?
You know, the BBI report is stock taking of many things that ail Kenyans and have ailed Kenyans over the years. So if you look at Kenya at 56, you're looking at a country of shattered dreams, a country where some people feel excluded, a country where corruption is really endemic, and also where you have family in crisis, institutions that we trust, like religious institutions, are no longer trustworthy. So I see the BBI report as a report that calls us to think and to have a serious conversation about where we are at as a country and where we want to go.
But Prof, it looks like we have done this before. I mean, even the Constitution of Kenya 2010 really tried to write in some of the concerns that have been raised by the BBI report, the question of ethos, the question of ethics, now teaching children to be responsible and to love the country, patriotism, things that have been written already into the Constitution of Kenya 2010. Why did it have to require another report to tell us what we ought to have known from the beginning?
You know, constitutions are not cast in stone. They're dynamic instruments. And you see, a constitution was written in 2010. If you leave it, this is the 10th year. It's going to be 10 next year. Right. So if it's going to be 10, it means that one needs to look at where have we done well, take stock of how are we doing. And I think when you talk about ethics, we've really failed. If you look at whether, as a country, we are one nation, I think we are nations. And you know, this is not a new problem. It's a problem that we inherited from colonialism. If you look at the title of the report, it's talking about moving from being connected by blood ties to being connected by ideals.
Prof, the report says that 7,000 people from around 47 counties gave their views. Do you feel that what they said is what is really contained in this report?
You know, I'd be lying if I said that what they said is what is contained in the report, because I was not out there. But I have no reason to believe that what was in the report isn't what people said. Mm-hmm. And you remember that towards the end of the period of the BBI team, they actually pitched tent at KICC and called everybody who had something to say. I believe that quite a good number of Kenyans have said what they thought. And if you look at the report, I think they got quite a lot of the things that ail this country. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I look at it this way. The roadmap is clear. What ails Kenya is known. The BBI report and its launch yesterday was another reminder of what ails Kenya. And ask anyone generally, they know if you don't deal with the question of inclusivity, if you don't deal with the question of corruption, if you don't deal with the question of equitable distribution of resources, if you don't deal with the question of unemployment, job creation, the place of our youth, of our women,
government spending too much,
people with disabilities, government spending too much, all these things, people know them by mind and by heart what ails Kenya. Now, the challenge is It's not just the report. The challenge is now taking the report from Bomas to its implementation. And therein lies the next major problem.
Which is where I would want to ask Prof whether this issue of Kenya having very good documents, good laws, good papers, but there's still a huge gap between what we write and have in the shelves and what we actually practice.
You know, I think we're missing a point. How did BBI start? You know, it was a handshake. And a handshake is a relational thing. So it is not a document. I think what BBI calls for is an opening of hearts, not really looking at documents. So, you know, we're talking about hardware here and software.
Right.
And the software is what one would say are people committed to being together as Kenyans. And if we look at the leaders, the two leaders who, if you remember, this country towards the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, we forget. It was a country that was really tottering. It was, we were not sure when we woke up what would happen. So I would say that I'd give BBI a chance because it is relational. But it depends on the goodwill of the people who lead us. But we as Kenyans ought to hold them accountable because they can't always lead us around into these kinds of uncertainties.
And Prof, I think one of the chapters in our current constitution that I think speaks to what you're talking about, where it's been, I think, most manifestly seen, this whole thing about whether we are committed to what we say, is chapter 6, which we've talked about so many times, not too sure whether it has ever been implemented, but there is something I think you were presenting there and touching on that we just want to listen to before we go on with the conversation.
The fight against corruption, Your Excellency, the Kenyan said, is ineffective. And Chapter 6 of the Constitution, 10 years later, has not been implemented. Cartels are in all sectors. The economy is captured and it is rigged from the beginning.
I almost choked on that because it is so true. I mean, those are very scary statements that came from Kenyans, that, you know, this is rigged from the beginning. And that surely goes beyond the relationship we are talking about here. How do we get to that point where what people say, what is written in all these documents actually begins to become our reality day to day? Because those cartels cannot be got rid of merely on the strength of a document, isn't it?
You know, any document, even a law, is as good, is not even worth the paper it's written on unless people implement it. But with things like ethics, like integrity, I like to say that ethics is what you do when no one is watching you. And it is not just about our leaders, it is also about us. Because if you look at the issue of corruption, not following the rule of law, it is not just about our leaders, it is all of us. I mean, you just need to drive on the streets and see that law is followed more in breach than in observance. So in essence, Chapter 6 on leadership and integrity would call the leaders to be the ones who lead the way. And here we are talking about leaders being servant leaders, leaders holding leadership as a trust. That you see people trust you, that's why they've given you the mandate. And therefore you ought to execute it as a trust, and the beneficiaries should feel it. But all of us, I think, contribute to the deficit of ethics. Look at a country that you're saying 80% are Christians and others Muslims. In there, we have so many norms of good behavior. Why is it that we have runaway corruption when we are a nation of Christians and Muslims. I mean, it should be something that even if we saw our leaders doing it, we would call them out. Why don't we call them out? Yeah.
Professor, you spoke earlier, referred to the handshake and spoke about relationships. And I want to take you to one other issue that was identified by this report, which is ethnic antagonism and competition. Both President Uhuru Kenyatta and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga kept talking about, and even in the run-up to this, this winner-takes-it-all arrangement in elections. And the report recommends that we do away with the winner-takes-it-all model of the presidency. And you look at the specifics, it doesn't really get rid of the winner-takes-it-all model, does it?
You know, I'd say the devil is in the details. Our law talks about 50+1.
Yes.
But if you get 50+1, there may be somebody with 40, and that has been our history. Many of the elections in our post-1992 have had very huge people in the opposition. Yeah. And you see what happens is you have elections, Joe Aguayo is the president, all of you go back home and wait for the next election. But forgetting that we all have our constituents. And you see, there is a sense in which we think that Joe getting in there, the people who associate with him benefit, whilst everybody else loses. So in essence, I think we have to create a model of governance where the winner has to accommodate the interests of other people because they also voted, and there is a sense in which they all have a voice and they all belong to Kenya.
I look at it this way. Looking at the recommendations, one, the presidential system still remains as powerful as it currently is. You're introducing a prime minister slot and cabinet ministers who are coming from parliament. But there's a possibility in the arrangement of our politics for the winning political party to have the president, the deputy president, the prime minister, and the cabinet that is coming from parliament from the same party. So even if Jamila's party got number 2 and they had, let's say, 48%, Jamila will come to parliament as the leader of opposition. Maybe there's a semblance of accommodation among her supporters, that they will see she's still in parliament and she's raising fundamental questions. And
there's a shadow cabinet.
And there's a shadow cabinet and so on and so forth. But I still see it as if the winning political party still controls a majority of the positions. Actually, it's like the winner is taking everything.
But I think I think one of the things that they've said from just talking to a few people is that that party or that presidential candidate, whoever ends up with that kind of scenario, will have gone around this country for them to have the kind of majority that we are talking about in parliament. It basically forces that person to literally go to comb every corner of this country trying to get not just the presidential vote, but to get parliamentary seats, which is an interesting thing. But yes, there could yet be another scenario where the person who is president
doesn't have a majority.
Not necessarily from the same party as the person who becomes the prime minister, because then the other party could have a majority, such as what we had in 2007.
Coalition, maybe?
And it is not inconceivable in our politics. That means, therefore, there will be the need for coalition building. But more importantly, the president will be forced to start speaking with the rival party almost immediately after the election, knowing, for example, how it often is polarized here. So the thing that forces you, these guys were talking about the handshake, how they had to reflect and look for each other, I don't know after how long. But here, the president will be forced, quite literally, to look for the other people immediately, because otherwise then there will be no government, there will be no prime minister.
Speaking to a number of MPs, current and a few former who were at Bomas, they were saying this arrangement of having cabinet ministers coming from parliament is good. Why? Because if you're the member of parliament for Westlands and you want answers, because one of your functions is representation. So representation entails asking questions for and on behalf of your people. So if they see you asking the minister for roads, why roads in your constituency are not good, there's a feeling that you're doing something. And at the same time, this parliamentarian, who is also relating with a cabinet minister, who is also a fellow parliamentarian, there's some semblance of, you know, friendship, so to say. This is your colleague in parliament. So even if you ask them questions, they will not necessarily take offense. And actually, the current situation, lastly, is that ministers are away from parliament. And you've seen the antagonism between members of parliament and cabinet secretaries. In fact, some cabinet secretaries even say they feel harassed by committees because you see them coming to parliament like 3 or 4 times a week. You're coming from the public, let's say from jailer committee, tomorrow you're being summoned by another committee, but probably it will slightly change because these are your colleagues, you're with them there, so they can ask you questions and you respond to those questions instantly. And
there's a question I want to ask to Prof. in terms of the cabinet, the returning of cabinet ministers and getting rid of cabinet secretaries. Is this not too soon? Are we a bit impatient in letting the structures of 2010 constitution take hold?
Actually, you know, the proposal is for mixed cabinet, that you will have ministers who are members of parliament, but you will also have ministers coming from the outside. And the idea is to have the ministers who come from outside to be able to sit in the House so that they can answer the question. Because what has been seen in the 9 years is this lack of direct link and the delays in answering questions. So you would ask your question and then I'll tell you I'll go and ask. Then when you come back and ask a further question, I'll tell you let me go back. So having the technocrats also come into parliament and answer questions is something that's
Prof, I'd like to go into, I'm sorry, Joseph, I interrupted you. Back to the Prime Minister's office. It has been recommended that whoever he or she will be, will get same salary as a member of parliament. There'll be no additional salary for his role. But remember now, he or she will be a person who will have supervision and execution of the day-to-day functions, as it says, and there'll be a PS or a principal secretary in the office of the Prime Minister who will chair the technical implementation committee. There's all that. Despite saying that whoever he or she will be, will not earn a salary more than a member of parliament, but they'll need an office, they'll need a staff, they'll need, that will be additional costs on the taxpayer. There's no, you're going to expect a Prime Minister to work maybe from an office at County Hall like all other members of parliament do. But then this means a bit more money having to be set aside now to set up a Prime Minister's office.
I think we've had a Prime Minister's office before. And if you look at what happened after the 2013 elections and now 2017, you keep having the padding up and padding up and padding up. So if we have a well-organized Prime Minister's office, where you're having the coordination roles coming from. Right now, you have the Minister for Interior as almost the designate coordinating minister. So if you have that coming from Parliament, you will resource them, but the resourcing is going to draw from the available human resources, because there's quite a lot of human resources. I don't think that all the people who worked in government when there was Prime Minister were told go home, now there's no Prime Minister. Actually, you will see that a lot of the problems we are having with bloated staff is that we have a failure to let people go. So you have duplication of roles. So rationalization is going to be what needs to be done.
Finally, what does this do, Prof, to the whole principle of separation of powers? Because there was that big concern, which is probably why we said, let the CSS come from out there. Because right now you will have essentially people who are members of parliament, the legislature that is, and they're also members of the executive at the same time.
You know, there is never really pure separation of powers. Because, like you see, when we try to have the cabinet secretaries who come from outside, we have the shortcomings because they need to work together. So it is just ensuring that Parliament doesn't interfere with the executive unduly, but checks actually the actions of the executive, and also that the executive does not impinge on the other arms of government. This requires a lot of trust, and you can't write that in law.
Actually, I look at it this way, Joe. The Prime Minister slot that is being recommended is more like a merger of the current CS Matiang'i and current Majority Leader Aden Duale. This is an elected member of Parliament who will be nominated by the President to be a Prime Minister, whose functions will be leader of government business in Parliament and also coordination of government affairs. That is, coordination of government affairs is exactly what CS Matiang'i does as a result of Executive Order Number 1. And leader of government business is exactly what Aden Duale does currently and in the last term. So I look at the Prime Minister slot that is being proposed by the BBI team as that combination of functions. Now, the question is, will there be a majority leader in the National Assembly once we have this Prime Minister? Or will there be an arrangement where this Prime Minister slot, because it doesn't have deputies, will be deputized maybe in the House administratively by another member of the ruling party?
No, but why would you need it? Because this is the same person who's leader of government business, which is what people like Saitoti, for example, used to do. And this is the same person also who will answer questions once every week, generally on behalf of the entire government.
At times, the Prime Minister will not be in the House. That Prime Minister is not expected to be in the House at all times. Maybe will be out of the country and so on and so forth. Maybe they can even fall sick. So will there be a designation for, let's say, in the event the Prime Minister is not in the House, there is somebody who is holding that position in an acting capacity, albeit.
What does this do to the office of the Deputy President, considering that if the recommendations go as has been put here by the BBI team, there'll still be a pair? Whoever it will be, the presidential candidate, the deputy president, going around campaigning for to be elected, and once elected, he or she still goes back to be deputizing the president. But here comes a prime minister, mwenye mamlaka, someone who did not go through all that with them. They probably end up getting that position because they're probably in the good books of the president, because he has the role of appointing whoever the prime minister would be. But what does this do to the office of the deputy president?
The report has two short sentences for the office of the deputy president.
Short.
One, the deputy president is the running mate to the president. Two, the deputy president shall deputize the president.
And that's exactly how it works even currently. Yeah. What would, if you asked, what are the functions of Deputy President William Ruto currently in the Constitution? It is to deputize the president. Yeah. So in essence, I look at it this way. His functions are more or less like the functions of the president, only that he exercises delegated functions. If the president tells him, do this, that's exactly what he will do.
Professor to comment on two things. One is replacing Boxing Day, 26th December, with a National Cultural Day. And two, the writing of the official history of Kenya as a nation. Beginning with the second one, I didn't know we don't have a history.
You know, many of us forget who we are. And the reason that people feel excluded is if you see history books, they may have written, say, about the Maasai, about another group, but not the smaller groups. So what is aimed to be done is to have the histories of the Kenyan communities written and the history of the Kenyan nation. We are not a good people at documenting our history. In fact, I don't know whether it is from colonialism. It's almost like we have amnesia. We want to forget.
Amnesia, I think.
And this is what they were talking about, putting things under the carpet. But you see, when you put things under the carpet, it's like putting Band-Aid on a festering wound. So you can keep putting, but one time it comes up. So it's good for people to write their histories and then have those histories be part of what then becomes the Kenyan nation.
But Prof, there are people who say history is not entirely neutral. It depends a lot of times on who's writing it. There's a lot of revisionism that happens when people write history. So how do we shepherd this history writing project, so that, I mean, people dispute even the current history that we take to be the history of Kenya, whether it is with regard to the struggle for independence and all of that, and Mau Mau and all these things. People say, well, that's not really what happened. When you speak to, for example, people who would say they're the true Mau Maus and that sort of thing. So how do you make sure that history is just that it is pure history?
You see, we are aware of the dangers. So we are going to watch for the histories that are written. In fact, I think the BBI report talks of a chief historian, a person who would be in charge of these histories. You know, we can't say that because people will doctor history that we ditch history. It will be a sad day when people read history and they don't read about who we are as a people. So what we need to do is to be vigilant about how the histories are written and who writes them and what stories are told and what ones are muted, to ensure that we don't disempower people through history, or even just remove them from the books.
Joe, we can't let Prof go before discussing the way forward in terms of what next for BBI. Which route will it take in terms of implementing? Will we have a referendum?
You know, I think everybody was stuck on that referendum. And the reason that people are even talking about it being a miss is because there's, you know, you're looking, maybe searching the document for the word referendum. And what BBI is that it's not a prescriptive document. In fact, at the very beginning, it basically says it's within the context of existing documents. The way forward is these conversations that we are having. Let us not forget that the Constitution requires public participation. So there is no way that what BBI says is going to be rammed down people's throats. It's going to be negotiated. I think it was the Deputy President, if you listened to him, he kept talking about a democratic, honest, transparent conversation. We need to have a national conversation so that whatever it is that we go on with is agreed by everybody. But what people expected was that we're going to toss this one and say we're going to referendum. I don't think that referendum is really a necessary outcome of BBI. If it is, because now one has to look at what are the issues that need to be done. And my view is that a lot of them don't require referendum.
But is it possible to have this in the Constitution any other way without going through the referendum?
You know, there are different issues that require referendum. Say the
change of the executive, for example, introducing the office of Prime Minister.
And CS is coming from
the mixed cabinet.
Making all those alterations to
members of Parliament.
There are some that will require a referendum. But you see, that doesn't have to come now. Because you see, we already have a government in place. So what you need to do is probably put those questions at the next election. And then the decision will then inform the outcome of that next election. Because you see, everybody talks about the cost of referendum. So instead of saying 4 billion between now and 2022, let us agree that these are the issues that we need. 1, 2, and 3 need to be taken to referendum. And if they need referendum, we will do it with a general election, which we must do in August of 2022. And you see, because in governance, the outcome of the elections is what we will now have. It's not like we're going to have this happening now. If it is decided in the referendum that this won't happen, we continue business as usual. If it is decided that it happens, then we can actually move with it.
So some of the recommendations are very specific, like very clear. IEBC, for example, I see that proposal that we go to the next election on a clean slate. That means the current team at Anniversary Towers goes home. Those commissioners, I've had them insist today that they have a term in office that ends in 2023. So even convincing them to exit will require some arrangement. Either convince them to exit and you pay them off, or have them removed by repealing the law.
You know, you forget the first IEBC. Do you remember how the first IEBC was removed? There is nothing to prevent the same process. And I hope that we will have more discussion than we had when the Isaac Hassan Commission was removed.
All right, Professor.
Can I just put this question from Gakuo to Professor? He's asking what's the difference between this document and others that preceded, like Krigla, Ndungu, Waki, TJRC?
You see, Krigla was post-election violence, very specific. It was looking at what happened in 2007, 2008. Ndungu report was actually a report on the illegally and irregularly acquired public land. What's the other one? That is the Jonjo Commission was also on land.
TJRC.
TJRC was actually looking at the historical.
I think the point Gakuo is making is we never implemented them anyway, do we?
And this is what I was talking about. That what will move this to the next level is not going to be the document itself. It's going to be the goodwill of the different parties, and this is where relationships come in.
That's a good place to. That's a good place to release.
A small one. There's a gentleman called Kanyi Gyokom. He's saying you can't legislate everything in life. It's the surest way to failure. BBI is a vehicle that is meant to ensure someone is safe for the next 3 years. It is shelf-bound thereafter.
You know, I see. Just look at building bridges. Then look at our fixation with law. You know, we all think about when you put it in law, it's going to be implemented. But you know, a lot of things that happen are really not legal. Many things that people agree, this is the way to go, they will go that way. So BBI has different prescriptions. And those, not prescriptions, actually proposals. Those proposals will be discussed, and once discussed and agreed on, then ways of implementing them. I think if you look at the report, they talk about an 18-month implementation phase. And it is in that you will now isolate what can be done without too much fuss. Like if you're saying these Boxing Day and Cultural Day, remember we also have an October 10th holiday that now hangs around. We have so basically there is something to be said about having a day when we talk about our culture. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Patricia Kameri-Mbote, joining us on the News Gang tonight, and we'll be releasing her shortly. But before then, we are going to take a break, and on the other side, we'll discuss just some of those moments we saw at Bomas. We're calling it the Bomas of tension. Don't go away.